I used to think loneliness was just being alone in a room. But real loneliness is lying next to someone who's counting your money while you sleep. I learned that lesson at 64, halfway around the world, with nothing left but the clothes on my back and a one-way ticket home I couldn't afford. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our longtime viewers from Canberra, and he wanted his experience heard. I can still remember the exact moment Aisha first said those words to me. We were sitting on the small plastic chairs outside our apartment in Kalukan, the evening heat making my shirt stick to my back, and she was holding my hand with both of hers. "Kenneth," she said, her voice soft and serious, "I will take care of you when you are old. I promise you will never be alone." The way she looked at me when she said it, with those dark eyes that seemed to see right through all my fears, it felt like salvation. I'd been divorced for 3 years, living in a 2-bedroom house in Canberra that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. My ex-wife got the friends in the divorce, and my kids were too busy with their own lives to call more than once a month. I was 64 years old and felt invisible to the world. Then I met Aisha online, and suddenly someone 24 years old was telling me she wanted to build a life with me. "I don't care about your age," she would say when I brought up our 40-year difference. "Age is just a number. What matters is the heart." I believed her because I needed to believe her. When she promised to care for me in my old age, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I had already been sending her money for 6 months. By then, small amounts at first for her phone bill and transportation to meet me. But sitting there that evening, listening to her paint a picture of our future together, it all seemed worth it. "My family, they already love you," she told me, squeezing my hands tighter. "They see how good you are to me, how you take care of me. They want to take care of you too." I remember thinking how lucky I was. How many men my age get a second chance at love with someone so young and beautiful? Someone who actually wanted to be with me, not just tolerate me. The financial support I was already providing felt like an investment in something real, something lasting. "When you are 70, 80 years old," she continued, "I will cook your meals, help you with your medicine, make sure you are never lonely." I could see it all in my mind, growing old with someone who genuinely cared about my well-being, who would be there when I needed help getting dressed or remembering to take my pills. It was everything I had been afraid I would never have. But even then, there were signs I chose to ignore because acknowledging them would have meant facing the possibility that I was wrong about everything. The first was how quickly our conversations turned to money. "Kenneth, my mother is sick again," Aisha would say during our video calls. "The doctor says she needs medicine, but it's so expensive." I would ask how much, and she would get tears in her eyes. "I don't want to ask you for money all the time. You already do so much for me." But then she would tell me the amount, and it was always just enough to make me hesitate, without being so large I would refuse outright. $200 for medicine, $300 for rent because her father lost his job, $500 for her brother's school fees because education was so important to their family. Each time, I told myself, this was normal. This was what people who cared about each other did. They helped during difficult times. "In Australia, we don't understand how families work here," she would explain when I seemed reluctant. "Here, when you love someone, you love their whole family. You take care of them too." She made me feel guilty for hesitating, like I was being selfish or culturally insensitive. "I know it's different from your country," she would say, wiping her eyes, "but this is how we show love here. Family is everything." I convinced myself she was right. I had plenty of money saved from 40 years of government work, and what was I saving it for anyway? To die alone with a fat bank account? When she cried about her family's problems, I felt important, needed. Here was someone who actually required my help, who valued what I could provide. Back in Canberra, I felt useless, like dead weight taking up space. But with Aisha, I was a provider, a protector, someone essential to her family's survival. The amounts got larger over time, but so gradually I hardly noticed. What started as $100 here and there became $500, then $1,000. "I hate asking you," she would always say first. "I feel so bad about this, but you're the only one who can help us. She made each request feel like a crisis, like lives were at stake if I didn't respond immediately. And maybe they were. How was I supposed to know what constituted a real emergency in the Philippines? I was just a retired bureaucrat from Australia who had never lived anywhere else. Aisha said her family needed money for medical bills or food or rent. I believed her, because the alternative was believing she was lying to me, and I wasn't ready to face that possibility yet. The real trap came disguised as an opportunity, wrapped in family warmth and business jargon that made it sound legitimate and promising. Aisha's cousin Miguel needed investors for his small grocery store in their neighborhood. "It's a good business," Aisha explained excitedly during one of our calls. "Everyone needs food, and there are no other stores nearby. Miguel is very smart, very honest. He just needs capital to expand." She arranged for me to meet Miguel and his wife, Carmela, at their house the next time I visited. The meeting felt like a real business presentation. Miguel had papers, receipts, even a simple business plan handwritten in English. "Sir Kenneth," he said, respectful and earnest, "with your investment, we can double the store size and bring in more products. You will get 20% return on your money every year. Plus, you will be family business partner." Carmela served us dinner and talked about how grateful they were for everything I already did for Aisha. Their children, cute kids who called me Uncle Kenneth, showed me their school projects. It felt legitimate, familial, like I was being welcomed into something real and lasting. "This is perfect for our future," Aisha whispered to me later that night. "When we have our own house, we will have steady income from the store. You won't have to worry about money in your old age." The way she talked about it, it wasn't just an investment, it was securing our life together. I would be a business owner in the Philippines, connected to the community, part of something bigger than just retirement checks from Australia. $20,000 seemed reasonable for such an opportunity, especially when I calculated the returns over 10 or 20 years. "You are so smart, Kenneth," Aisha said when I agreed to invest. "This is why I love you. You think about our future, about building something together." She was more affectionate that week than she had been in months, constantly touching my arm, telling me how proud she was to be with such a wise, generous man. For the first time in years, I felt like I was making smart decisions instead of just drifting through retirement. I was building something, creating a legacy, ensuring that my golden years would be comfortable and productive. The money went through Aisha since she was family and could handle the transaction more easily. Miguel gave me a handwritten receipt and promised monthly updates on the store's progress. But after the business investment, the emergencies multiplied and intensified, each one more urgent than the last, each one making me feel like a heartless monster if I hesitated even for a moment. "Kenneth, we have a crisis," Aisha would say, her voice shaking with tears. "My mother, she had another heart attack. She's in the hospital now, and they won't treat her unless we pay first. Please, I don't know what else to do." How do you say no to something like that? How do you tell someone you love that their mother might die because you don't want to spend money? The hospital bills were never small, $3,000, $5,000, $8,000 at a time. Then her brother's school suddenly required new fees to avoid expulsion. Her father's diabetes medication wasn't covered by their insurance. The roof of their house started leaking, and repairs would cost $4,000 to prevent everything inside from being destroyed. Each crisis felt isolated, manageable, temporary. "I promise this is the last time," Aisha would always say. "After this, no more problems. We can focus on our future." But there was always another crisis, another emergency, another family member in desperate need. The guilt was overwhelming. Every time I hesitated, Aisha would get quiet and distant. "I understand," she would say sadly. "I know I ask too much. Maybe I should handle this alone." But then she would get sadder, more withdrawn, until I felt like the worst person alive for having doubts. "You don't understand how families work here," she finally told me during one of these conversations. "In the Philippines, when you love someone, you love their whole family. You take care of them. That's just how it is." She made me feel like I was failing some basic test of love and commitment. Meanwhile, I was borrowing against my house in Canberra, liquidating investments. I had planned to leave to my children, running up credit card debt for the first time in my adult life. But I told myself this was temporary, that once we got through this difficult period, everything would stabilize. Aisha kept promising that things would get better, that we just needed to get through these rough months, that our investment in Miguel's store would start paying dividends soon. "You are saving my whole family," she would tell me when I sent another transfer. "I will never forget this. I will spend my whole life making this up to you." It was during these conversations about our future that Aisha would paint the most vivid, comforting pictures of how she would care for me when I was truly old and helpless. "When you are 75 and need help walking," she would say, holding my hands and looking directly into my eyes, "I will be right there beside you. I will help you to the bathroom, help you get dressed, make sure you take your medicine on time." The way she described it was so detailed, so loving, it felt like she had already planned every aspect of my care. "I will cook all your favorite foods even when you lose your appetite. I will read to you when your eyes get tired. I will hold your hand when you're scared about your health." These weren't just casual promises. They were elaborate fantasies that made me feel secure about growing old for the first time in my life. "We will have a nice house with a garden," she would continue, her voice dreamy and certain. "You can. Sit outside in the morning and watch me water the plants. I will grow vegetables for our meals and flowers to make you happy. When your children visit from Australia, they will see how well I take care of you, how happy you are." She made it sound like paradise. A beautiful young woman devoted to making my declining years comfortable and dignified. "And when you are very sick," she would whisper, "I will never leave your side. I will hold your hand and tell you how much I love you. You will never die alone, never be afraid. I promise you this, Kenneth. This is my sacred promise to you." I believed her completely, because I desperately wanted to believe her. The alternative was too terrifying to consider, that I would grow old alone, that I would spend my final years in some nursing home where overworked staff would see me as just another burden. Aisha was offering me love and dignity in my old age, promising that someone would actually care about my comfort and happiness until my very last day. It seemed worth any amount of money, any sacrifice. I started making plans to sell my house in Canberra and move to the Philippines permanently. What did I need with a big empty house when I could have a life full of love and purpose? "You see," Aisha would say when I talked about selling the house, "you understand now. We are building something beautiful together. This is real love. Not like those cold relationships in Western countries, where people put their parents in homes and forget about them." The transformation happened gradually, so slowly that I didn't recognize how completely I had been absorbed into financial responsibility for Aisha's entire extended family, until it was too late to extract myself without destroying what I thought we had built together. It started with her immediate family, mother, father, 2 brothers, 1 sister, but soon expanded to include aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and even family friends who were like family, and therefore my responsibility too. Kenneth. "My aunt's husband had an accident at work," Aisha would report during our weekly video calls. "They have no insurance and 3 small children. Can we help them just this once?" But just this once became a monthly obligation, then a weekly one. I was paying rent for 3 different households, electricity bills for 5 families, school fees for 8 children, and medical expenses for what seemed like half of Caloocan. The strangest part was how good it made me feel at first. When I visited the Philippines, everyone treated me like a patriarch, a respected elder whose arrival was cause for celebration. "Tito Kenneth," the children would shout when I walked into any house in the neighborhood. Adults would stand up when I entered a room, offer me the best chair, serve me first at meals. Aisha's family would gather around me in the evenings, asking about Australia, listening to my stories about government work, treating my opinions like wisdom worth preserving. For a man who had felt invisible and useless in his own country, this level of respect and importance was intoxicating. "You see how they love you," Aisha would say proudly. "This is what real family feels like, not like those cold Australian Families who abandon their elders. I felt needed, valued, essential to their well-being and happiness. When Aisha's mother would hug me and call me son, when her father would ask my advice about decisions, when the children would show me their report cards and thank me for making their education possible, I felt like I had found my true purpose in life. The money stopped feeling like an expense and started feeling like an investment in love, belonging, and meaning. I was no longer just a retired bureaucrat waiting to die. I was the foundation holding up an entire network of people who genuinely cared about me. Or so I thought. Looking back, I realized they were all performers in the elaborate play, and I was both the audience and the financial backer, too desperate for belonging to notice that none of the love was actually directed at me personally, just at what I could provide. The first crack in my fantasy came during what should have been a minor health scare, but turned into a revelation about where I actually stood in the hierarchy of Aisha's concerns. I was experiencing chest pains and shortness of breath one evening, symptoms that terrified me given my age and family history of heart disease. "Aisha," I called out, clutching my chest as I sat on our bed. "Something's wrong. I think I need to go to the hospital." I expected immediate concern, the loving care she had promised me, the devoted attention of someone who had sworn to be by my side through sickness and health. Instead, her first response was, "How much will that cost?" Not, "Are you okay?" Or, "Let me help you get dressed, or I'll call for a taxi right now." Her first thought was money, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. At the hospital, while I was having tests run and waiting to see if I was having a heart attack, Aisha spent most of her time in the hallway making phone calls. I could hear fragments of her conversations, and none of them were about my health. "Yes, he's in the hospital now," she would say in Tagalog, not knowing I had learned enough to understand basic conversations. "I don't know how long this will take. We might need to delay the other payments." She was reorganizing her financial priorities around my medical emergency, not because she was worried about my well-being, but because she was calculating how this would affect the money flow to her family. When the doctor told us it was just stress and indigestion, not a heart attack, Aisha's relief was obvious, but not for the reasons I had hoped. "Thank God," she said, but then immediately asked, "So he doesn't need to stay overnight?" No surgery or expensive treatments. The doctor explained that I should rest, avoid stress, and follow up with a cardiologist. Aisha's response was, "How much does a cardiologist cost? Is that really necessary?" I was still wearing a hospital gown, still feeling chest pains, still scared about my health, but she was already calculating expenses and questioning whether proper medical care was worth the cost. That night, as I lay in bed feeling weak and frightened, Aisha's attention was focused on her phone, updating family members not about my condition, but about how the hospital visit would affect this month's budget. It was the first time I clearly saw that my value to her was entirely financial, and my actual health and well-being were secondary considerations at best. The medical scare opened my eyes, but it was the mounting debt that really trapped me in a cycle I couldn't escape without. Losing everything, including the illusion that Aisha genuinely cared about my future well-being. The hospital bills, combined with the continued family emergencies and the ongoing business investment that never seemed to generate any returns, had drained my savings and maxed out my credit cards. I was borrowing money just to make the minimum, payments on other borrowed money, a situation I had never imagined possible at my age. "Kenneth, I know someone who can help," Aisha said when I explained that I couldn't cover her brother's school fees and her mother's medication in the same month. "My friend knows a man who lends money to expats. Very reasonable rates, very understanding about payment schedules." I should have recognized this as the final trap, but I was so deep in the fantasy of our shared future that I couldn't see how it would end. The loan shark, a soft-spoken man named Rico who met us at a coffee shop in Manila, made everything sound simple and temporary. "Sir Kenneth, no problem. You need 50,000 pesos now. You pay back 60,000 pesos in 6 months. Very easy, very flexible." 50,000 pesos was about 1,500 Australian dollars, not enough to solve my real problems, but enough to buy time and keep the family emergencies covered for another month or two. What I didn't understand was how quickly the interest would compound and how inflexible Rico would become when payments were late. Within 3 months, I owed twice the original amount and was taking out new loans to pay the old ones. "Don't worry," Aisha kept telling me. "Miguel's business is doing very well. He will start paying dividends soon and we can pay everything back." But Miguel's business seemed to exist only in conversations. I never saw financial statements, never visited the expanded store, never received any of the promised returns. Meanwhile, Rico was introducing me to other lenders, men with harder eyes and less patience, men who made it clear that borrowed money in the Philippines came with consequences beyond bad credit ratings. I was 64 years old, living on borrowed money from increasingly dangerous people, all to maintain a relationship with someone who had promised to care for me in my old age but couldn't be bothered to show genuine concern when I had chest pains. The irony was crushing. In trying to secure care for my declining years, I had created a situation that was destroying my health through stress and fear. Then came the real test of Aisha's promises, the moment when I would discover whether any of her commitments about caring for me were genuine or just words designed to keep the money flowing. I contracted dengue fever during the rainy season, a serious illness that left me bedridden with high fever, severe body aches, and dangerous dehydration. For a man my age, dengue could be fatal without proper medical care and constant monitoring. This was exactly the kind of situation Aisha had promised to handle, nursing me through illness, making sure I received proper treatment, staying by my side until I recovered. "Aisha, I need to go to the hospital," I managed to say through the fever. "I can barely move and I think I'm getting worse." She looked at me with what I initially mistook for concern, but quickly recognized as calculation. "Hospitals are very expensive for dengue," she said. "Maybe you should rest here for another day or two and see if you get better on your own." I was too weak to argue, too sick to make decisions for myself, completely dependent on someone who had sworn to protect my health above all else. Instead of the devoted care she had promised, I got minimal attention and constant complaints about the burden I was creating. "I can't stay here all day watching you," she would say when I asked for water or help getting to the bathroom. "I have things to do, places to be." Her visits to my bedside became shorter and less frequent. She would bring me a glass of water and some crackers, check her phone for messages, and then disappear for hours at a time. When I asked where she was going, she would get defensive. "I'm handling things for us," she would snap. "Someone has to take care of the practical matters while you're sick." But I could hear her in the other room, laughing on phone calls, watching television, living her normal life while I lay dying in the next room. After 3 days of getting worse instead of better, I insisted on going to the hospital despite her objections. "Fine," she said, clearly annoyed, "but I can't stay there with you all the time. I have responsibilities." At the hospital, she disappeared for hours at a time, leaving me alone and scared in a foreign medical system where I barely spoke the language. When she did visit, she spent more time complaining about the costs than asking about my condition. "The doctor says you might need to stay for a week," she told me one afternoon. "Do you know how much that will cost? We can't afford this right now." I was hooked up to an IV, running a fever of 104 degrees, and she was lecturing me about money, as if I had gotten sick on purpose to inconvenience her. The nurses were more attentive to my needs than the woman who had promised to love and care for me through sickness and health. It was during my recovery from dengue, when I was still weak and spending most of my time in bed, that I accidentally discovered the truth about where my money had been going and what Aisha had been doing during all those hours when she claimed to be handling things for us. I was looking for my phone charger in her purse when I found a second phone I had never seen before. Curious and already suspicious from her behavior during my illness, I turned it on and found hundreds of messages and photos that destroyed every illusion I had built about our relationship. The messages were between Aisha and a man named Paulo, someone her own age who lived just a few streets away from our apartment. The conversations went back months, maybe even back to the beginning of our relationship. "I miss you so much, baby," she had written to him just the day before. "I can't wait until Kenneth is asleep so I can come see you." There were photos of them together, intimate photos, vacation photos from trips I had paid for, but thought she had taken with her female cousins. The most crushing part wasn't just that she was cheating on me, it was reading how she talked about me to him. "The old man is getting suspicious," she wrote in one message. "I have to be more careful about my time with you." In another, "He wants me to promise to take care of him when he's old, can you imagine? Like I would waste my life changing diapers for some foreigner." She called me ATM Kenneth in several messages, referring to how easy it was to get money from me for any sob story. "I told him my mother needs surgery again," she wrote, followed by laughing emojis. "He sent $5,000 immediately. We can use that for our trip to Boracay next month." I sat there in our bed, still recovering from dengue fever, reading message after message about how foolish I was, how easy I was to manipulate, how they laughed about my desperation for love and companionship. The business investment with Miguel? That money had gone directly to supporting Paulo and Aisha's relationship. The family emergencies, most of them were fabricated, and the real ones were handled with my money, while she and Paulo lived like a young couple in love. Every promise about caring for me in my old age, every tender moment when she held my hands and painted pictures of our future together. It was all performance designed to keep me financially and emotionally invested in an elaborate lie. I had been supporting another man's relationship with the woman I thought loved me. When I confronted Aisha with the evidence from her secret phone, her transformation from loving caregiver to cold manipulator was so complete and immediate that I finally understood how thoroughly I had been deceived from the very beginning of our relationship. "So you found my other phone," she said calmly when I showed her the messages. No denial, no explanation, no apology, just acknowledgement that the game was over. "I suppose you want me to explain myself now?" I was still weak from dengue, sitting on our bed with printouts of her messages spread around me like evidence in a criminal trial. "How long has this been going on, Aisha? How long have you been lying to me?" She didn't even try to look ashamed. Instead, she sat down across from me and spoke in a voice I had never heard before, flat, businesslike, devoid of any warmth or affection. "From the beginning, Kenneth, from the very first day we started talking online. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away." "But why?" I asked, still hoping for some explanation that would make sense, some indication that at least part of what we had shared was real. "Why go through all this if you never cared about me at all?" She looked at me like I was stupid for even asking. "Because you had money and I needed money. Because you were lonely and desperate and easy to control. Because men like you come to the Philippines looking for young girls to take care of them, and girls like me know exactly how to give you what you want to hear." The woman who had promised to hold my hand when I was dying was explaining my exploitation like she was discussing the weather. "Did you really think I would spend my life taking care of an old man?" she continued. "Did you really believe that someone like me would love someone like you for any reason other than money?" She gestured toward the printouts of her messages. "Paulo and I have been together for 3 years. We're the same age, we have the same interests, we actually love each other. You were just convenient, a way to pay our bills while we built our real life together." I felt like I was having another heart attack, but this time it was emotional rather than physical. "But you promised," I whispered, knowing how pathetic I sounded. "You looked me in the eyes and promised you would care for me when I'm old." She laughed, actually laughed. "Kenneth, you paid for promises. You paid for companionship. You paid for the fantasy of being loved by a young, beautiful woman. And I delivered exactly what you paid for as long as you kept paying. That was our arrangement, whether you understood it or not." The next morning I woke up alone. Aisha had taken the last of my accessible money, about $3,000 I'd been keeping for emergencies, and disappeared completely, leaving me to face the consequences of months of borrowed money and unfulfilled promises to increasingly impatient and dangerous creditors. My phone started ringing before I was fully awake. Rico, the loan shark, who had seemed so understanding and flexible in the beginning, was no longer speaking softly. "Kenneth, where is my money? You were supposed to pay yesterday." I tried to explain that I had been sick, that there had been complications with my finances, that I just needed a few more days to sort things out. "I don't care about your problems," Rico interrupted. "I care about my money. You have until tonight to pay what you owe, or we have a different kind of conversation. But I didn't have the money, and I had no way to get it. My credit cards were maxed out, my bank accounts were empty, and I had already borrowed against everything I owned back in Australia. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was completely cut off from financial resources, and I owed money to people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. I tried calling Aisha, hoping she might at least explain where she had gone or when she might return, but her phone was disconnected. I went to her family's house thinking maybe they would know where she was, but the house was empty with a "for rent" sign in the window. I asked neighbors about the family, but everyone claimed not to know where they had gone. It was as if Aisha and her entire extended family had vanished from Caloocan, leaving me alone with debts I couldn't pay and threats I couldn't escape. That evening, when Rico and 2 other men came to the apartment, I had to tell them the truth. That the woman who had helped arrange these loans had stolen what little money I had left and disappeared. "That's not my problem," Rico said, looking around the small apartment for anything valuable. "You signed the papers. You owe the money. Whether your girlfriend ran away doesn't change what you owe me." They took my laptop, my watch, even my wedding ring from my first marriage. "This covers maybe 10% of what you owe," Rico calculated. "You have 1 week to find the rest, or you find out what happens to old foreigners who don't pay their debts in the Philippines." The week that followed was the most terrifying of my entire life, as I discovered what it meant to be old, sick, broke and hunted in a foreign country with no support system and no realistic hope of escape. I moved out of the apartment I could no longer afford and into a boarding house in a rougher part of Manila, a place that charged by the day and didn't ask questions about identification or references. My room was barely large enough for a single bed and had no windows, but it was all I could afford with the few pesos I had left after Rico's men took everything valuable. I was rationing food, eating 1 small meal per day, and drinking water from questionable sources because bottled water was too expensive. The dengue fever had left me weak and prone to fatigue, but I couldn't afford proper nutrition or medical follow-up care. Every knock on my door might be Rico or his associates. Every phone call might be another creditor demanding payment. I had borrowed money from at least 6 different people, and word was spreading through the informal lending network that the old Australian couldn't pay his debts. I tried to contact my children back in Canberra, hoping they might help me get home or at least send enough money to keep me alive until I could figure out a solution. But my son's response was predictably unsympathetic. "Dad, we told you this would happen. We warned you about sending money to some girl in the Philippines. How much do you need us to bail you out this time?" When I explained the full scope of my situation, the debt, the threats, my complete financial collapse, he was silent for a long time. "I can't help you," he finally said. "Sarah and I have our own mortgage and kids to worry about. You made this mess. You'll have to figure out how to get out of it." My daughter was even less forgiving. "You chose some stranger over your own family," she told me. "I mortgaged your house to give money to a woman 40 years younger than you. What did you think was going to happen?" They weren't wrong, but their coldness left me completely isolated in my crisis. I had no family support, no friends in the Philippines, no government assistance available to foreign nationals in debt trouble. I was a 64-year-old man, slowly starving in a third-world boarding house, hiding from people who had made it clear that unpaid debts in their world were settled through violence. My absolute lowest point came 3 weeks after Aisha disappeared. When I was evicted from even the cheap boarding house for failing to pay my daily rent, and found myself sleeping in public places, begging for food, and seriously considering whether dying in the Philippines might be preferable to the complete humiliation of my situation. I had lost 30 pounds since getting dengue fever and looked like a homeless person, which I suppose I was. My clothes were dirty and torn, my hair had grown long and unkempt, and my hands shook constantly from malnutrition and stress. Filipino. Families would sometimes give me leftover food when they saw me sitting in parks or outside churches, treating me with the kind of pity reserved for mentally ill street people. The irony was unbearable. I had come to this country with a comfortable retirement savings, planning to spend my golden years being cared for by someone who claimed to love me, and instead I was literally begging for survival from strangers who couldn't understand why an elderly foreigner was living on the streets. The promises Aisha had made about caring for me in my old age kept playing in my head like a cruel joke. "I will cook all your favorite foods," she had said. I was eating scraps from garbage cans. "I will make sure you take your medicine on time." I couldn't afford basic medical care and was suffering from infections and ongoing health problems from the dengue fever. "You will never be alone or afraid." I had never been more alone or more afraid in my entire life. Every night brought new terrors. Would I find somewhere safe to sleep? Would I find something to eat tomorrow? Would Rico's men finally track me down and decide that killing me was easier than waiting for money I would never have? The woman who had sworn to hold my hand when I was dying had left me to die alone and broke in the streets of a foreign country, and I was beginning to think that death might actually be a mercy compared to the daily degradation of complete poverty and abandonment. I found myself sitting outside Manila Cathedral one afternoon, not because I was religious, but because it was one of the few places where security guards wouldn't immediately move me along. I was watching Filipino families come and go, thinking about how I had believed I would become part of a loving family structure, when I realized that the fantasy of being cared for in my old age had been replaced by the reality of being abandoned. In my old age, in the worst possible circumstances. The path back to Australia was humiliating and difficult, but it ultimately saved my life and gave me a chance to rebuild some small portion of my dignity, though I would never fully recover from the financial and emotional damage of believing someone who had never intended to keep any of the promises she made to me. My salvation came from an unexpected source. The Australian Embassy in Manila had a program for citizens who found themselves in crisis situations overseas. I had avoided contacting them because I was ashamed of how stupid I had been, but desperation finally overcame pride. The consular officer who interviewed me was professional, but clearly familiar with stories like mine. "You're not the first older Australian man who's come to us after being financially exploited by a younger Filipino woman," he told me matter-of-factly. "We see this pattern several times a month." They couldn't solve my debt problems or get my money back, but they could arrange emergency travel documents and a repatriation loan that would get me back to Australia. The loan would have to be